crammed to the brim as thousands of vehicles carrying Afghan civilians flee Lashkar-Gah. It's the latest mass exodus from a region beset with violence, sparked by heavy fighting between government forces and the Taliban. Under a deal the Taliban signed with Washington in February, the insurgents were not supposed to hit urban areas. But on Sunday evening, the Taliban appeared to renege on their agreement as militants launched a series of attacks on Lashkar-Gah, prompting the US to call in airstrikes to defend Afghan forces. Hundreds of casualties followed, while the United Nations estimates nearly 35,000 people were displaced. The week's violence represents the most serious and sustained attacks by the Taliban since peace negotiations with the government began last month in Qatar. So far, discussions have been bogged down in attempts to finalize a set of rules and procedures governing the talks.
The Speaker of the Cyprus Parliament, Dimitris Silouris, has resigned in the wake of a cash for passports scandal. An Al Jazeera investigation found senior politicians who were willing to sell Cypriot passports to convicted criminals. The scheme was run to attract financial investments into the country in exchange for EU citizenship. Well, the government has now abolished that programme.
Yes, well, there's been another dramatic development in Cyprus, where the Speaker of Parliament, Dimitris Silouris, has announced his resignation. Now, Mr. Silouris had been hanging on for a couple of days, but we've seen protests outside Parliament on 2 successive nights, and his name was the one they were calling for to resign. Mr. Silouris did not admit any wrongdoing. He still maintains his innocence, but he was a key figure in Al Jazeera's documentary, which revealed him to be agreeing to help a Chinese criminal obtain an EU passport.
A new law proposed by the ruling Nicaraguan party could be used as another powerful tool against free speech in the country, says the opposition and several international organisations. It establishes a punishment of 2 to 4 years in prison for anyone who spreads what it calls false information online. The worry is that it could simply be used to censor any reporting the autocratic government doesn't like.
So in practice, this is giving the government the sort of legal capacity to determine what information is true and what's false. And in a country where independent media are already facing a lot of censorship and intimidation at the hands of the government, this could be really dangerous for the journalists working for those outlets.
Another proposed law would force non-governmental organisations which get money from outside the country to register as foreign agents and agree not to interfere in internal affairs.
It's not just tensions between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Tensions between China and Japan are also rising. And amid the brewing East Asian dispute, Japan has now unveiled a massive 3,000-ton submarine. Known as the Big Whale submarine, it is Japan's show of strength against China. The Tage, also known as Big Whale, will be the 22nd addition to Japan's maritime self-defense submarine fleet. The vessel is reported to be 84 meters long and 9.1 meters wide. The submarine, costing $720 million, will be manned by 70 crew members at all times. With the submarine, Japan aims to boost the country's maritime security amid China's growing aggression in the region. This comes just a few days after Japan accused China of violating the country's territorial waters. Tokyo claimed that last Sunday, Chinese Coast Guard ships entered its territorial waters near the Senkaku Island in the East China Sea.
Thailand has raised its level of security alert under its latest emergency decree and deployed soldiers to guard key government buildings. The emergency decree bans gatherings of 5 or more people. It prohibits the publication of news that can affect national security. The measures were announced after thousands of anti-government protesters marched in Bangkok yesterday.
And about hundreds of people are now on the Ratchaprasong intersection here in central Bangkok. And as you can see, the situation is very fluid right now. police have cordoned off the intersection as people are still trying to mill around and trying to push the police back as much as they can. Now, this is a situation that we have foreseen for some time ago as well already, as the police officers are trying to contain the situation here, but the protesters are also trying to make a statement here. They're trying to make their stand by occupying the Rajapasong intersection here.
French police have searched the homes of the former prime minister, the current and former health ministers, and other top officials. That search today, part of an investigation into the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis.
First of all, as you said, they're the former prime minister, Edouard Philippe, a man who was often judged to have had a relatively good pandemic in terms of his communication. He's one of the subjects, as is the current health minister, Olivier Véran, and the woman who preceded him, Agnès Buzyn, amongst others. Now, in terms of the scope of this inquiry, the legalese is that this is a charge of effectively failing to help those in need. This translates really in terms of this investigation into whether the French government has always acted appropriately, morally, effectively on the information it had during the coronavirus crisis.
Here's the latest on the vaccine. Rushing to establish itself as a major player in race for the coronavirus vaccine, Russia has now approved a second COVID-19 vaccine. Developed by Siberia's Vector Institute, the new vaccine, named Epivac Corona, completed early-stage trials last month. Russia has given official approval to its COVID-19 vaccines without waiting for the results of large-scale trials in thousands of patients, which means the approval has come in after preliminary trials itself. Large-scale trials are normally required to prove that a drug is safe and effective. That decision has been criticized by scientists in other countries. According to Russian officials, first trial of the vaccine on 100 volunteers was successful, and post-registration trials of Epivac Corona would count 40,000 volunteers across the country.
London will move into Tier 2 restrictions on Saturday, meaning households in the city will be banned from mixing indoors.
It's my expectation that the government will today announce that London will shortly be moving into Tier 2, or the high alert level of restrictions. This move is based on the expert public health and scientific advice about what is necessary to save lives in the capital.
Local MPs have been informed that from Saturday, the capital will have tighter COVID restrictions imposed. The high alert level, or Tier 2, means all previous restrictions apply, including the rule of 6 and pubs and restaurants closing at 10 p.m, as well as the new restriction, which means households are banned from mixing indoors. This means people cannot meet their friends or family at their homes or to socialise in bars and shops. Londoners have also been told to avoid public transport where they can.
A Zimbabwean king says the country's economic and political problems won't end as long as politicians continue to snub him. King Mike Moyo is back home after receiving a spiritual calling to be the king of the Lozvi Empire. This was Zimbabwe's name between 1684 and 1889. Moyo says there's not enough recognition of him and the country's ancestors.
King Mike Moyo has celebrated the first anniversary of his installation. It coincided with a traditional wedding with his second wife at his homestead in Mawabeni, southeast of Bulawayo. Moyo said although President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government allowed his installation as king, it does not give enough recognition and respect to the resuscitation of the Lozvi Empire.
While the campaign officially begins on Thursday, we've known for some time now who the four candidates are and what their positions are going forward into this election. Incumbent President Alassane Ouattara is running for a controversial third term in office. His two key opponents in this election, Pascal Affi-Guesson and Henri Konan Bédié, they've said that this violates the constitutional limit on a two-term presidency. Now, when the Constitutional Court actually ruled in favour of Ouattara's standing again, Pascal Affi-Guesson and Henri Konan Bédié called for the court to be dissolved. They said that it wasn't an independent body, pointing to the fact that more than half of its judges were appointed by Ouattara himself.
Ahead of a massive opposition-led anti-government rally on the 16th of October, health workers in Pakistan's capital Islamabad took to the streets to demand higher salaries, both in light of the pandemic and inflation. The Imran Khan government has asked the opposition to postpone their rally amidst fears of a second wave of COVID-19, but the opposition has rejected that demand. Islamabad was taken by a storm of union-led protests from various sections. Now, these included government employees, farmers, doctors, teachers, and a host of others. What was once an individual and limited protest was clubbed into a grand agitation. The All Pakistan Clerks Association, women health workers and pensioners were among the various worker unions who staged a sit-in in front of Parliament House.